across a whole range of things, all the way from EAP to EEO to unions to what are the ways that we try to manage grievances, disagreements, claims with each other. Let me go quickly through duration of the word before or after. This is a long-lasting process we find, particularly bullying. And what we notice is when we look at the effects on people, essentially it disables people, it wears them down. It's like drip, 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 drip. So they're often not these big grand behaviors that everybody else sees, but it's the consistent, ongoing, enduring type of thing. In the U.S., in general, working populations, we have an average of about 16 and a half months. People report on average that this experience with someone or someone has lasted almost 17 months. In our own research here in Michigan, with representative samples, we have people claiming from 1 month to 10 years. And you're probably all going, 10 years, what the heck are you doing staying in a relationship in 10 years, right? Well, but I'll talk about some of the limitations for people. Faculty, this is the one that knocked our socks up. Ranged from 1 month to over 3 years. In our 2008 study, when we focused only on faculty, close to half of the faculty who said they've been bullied in the past year identified that it had been going on for over 3 years. Over 3 years. And then in the 2009, it was 47%. So we're seeing similar kinds of rates. When faculty say they've been bullied, it's been an enduring one. Which, on some level, do you find, why do you think that might be? Yes?
Well, I would imagine say if faculty feels his work or her work is not being valued and not getting promotion, that's a long-lasting condition.
Right.
I know of a person at another university who was granted tenure but never promoted from assistant to associate, and the reaction was that this person stopped doing research,
right,
so to get back at the department.
The other part here is tenure. Tenure keeps us in an institution. I mean, it's one of the reasons the institution grants us tenure, because they want us to stay and continue to do that work. What we know from the workplace bullying and hostility literature is the longer a situation like this goes on, the more likely other people come into play. So we'll actually see people being sucked into it. So actually there's a risk in long-term relationships. I know, you're like, okay, we don't want to do that. Here's just some overall things from our research, looking at academics, what we've been able to document in terms of the effects on people. And I think I want to highlight a couple of things. We find that people who self-identify as being bullied in their organizations, this is true for faculty, it's true for other employees in universities, is they'll be more dissatisfied with their current job. And the reason that's important is because job satisfaction is one of these key variables, key attitudes that we know does a phenomenal job of predicting some of the things that organizations, institutions, universities care about, productivity and so forth. We know that it predicts work withdrawal. So the infamous case of presenteeism, which is where we have faculty with us, but you know they're not really with us, right? They come in and teach, and then they're gone.
What's that term?
Presenteeism. Instead of absenteeism, presenteeism.
Yeah.
Dissatisfied with the university. That's risky for a university. They don't want to lose a talented faculty member, right? Fear at work. That's very powerful because what we know from research about fear at work is it predicts a whole variety of counterproductive work behaviors that can be very difficult. And they're more likely to leave. They're less likely to be committed and they're more likely to leave. So from an institutional perspective, this is an important issue. And what we know too is that witnesses, people who see this, it's not happening directly to them, but they see it and we see the same range of effects. So it has, you can see that it can have these kind of harmful relationships, even just between two people, can effectively work to poison an environment. I was just speaking with a faculty member about something that happened in his class and ended up ejecting a student, perhaps prematurely, and I was saying, okay, next time you're in class, it's an opportunity to speak to the class about how we deal with these kinds of things here. I said, because what you have to recognize is while it involved two people in your class, it involved everybody in your class. It involved everybody, because they were watching you, they were watching them, and they're trying to figure out how we can be in this place. So the same thing. What we know from other research as well, and I just highlighted in particular things that I think universities need to pay attention to: lost productivity, not doing scholarship, not teaching as well, that kind of thing. Turnover, talent flight, the absences or presenteeism piece, customer satisfaction. I know you guys all hate customer and student, but you know, if it affects student satisfaction, that has implications for their commitment to us, to staying with us, and so forth. And what we also know is there is increased risk of workplace violence. If somebody feels that they have been consistently mistreated, that's certainly perceived as unfair treatment. And for some people, that may mean they start to escalate and engage in more hostile and physically direct kinds of behaviors. Not something we want. So organizational culture is the piece that I'm interested in. What are the norms? Organizational culture, very simplistically, are the norms and expectations of behavior. Basically, what will this organization tolerate? Brodsky did some phenomenal work in this, in which he talked about organizational cultures as providing permission to harass. So by tolerating rudeness, by not responding or sanctioning incivility, no formal standards of acceptable behaviors, the infamous professional codes of conduct, which many professions on this campus, among faculty, they have professional codes of conduct. Right? And these behaviors are excluded in those professional codes of conduct. So it's a really interesting kind of, you don't have to get into the murky ground speech code, just access people's professional codes of conduct. And the belief that punitive measures, low-level aggression or coercion are functional. It's the old theory X, theory Y kind of thing. Theory X says people are nasty, brutish, and short, so you have to ride them because they won't, they won't do things otherwise. Theory Y essentially says people love to grow, they love to be challenged, they love to move, and so you create opportunities for them, reward, affirm, and recognize. Different kinds of things there. So what about academia? I like this quote. It's a really interesting one. Nelson and Lambert in early 2000 wrote about the ivory tower bullying, what they called ivory tower bullying. I highlight this part of it because they talk about the behaviors and they say, but you know what, that's really counter to who we say we are. We say we're about the life of the mind, rationality, cooperation, exchange, non-authoritarianism. And I think that's an interesting dilemma. I think it's a really interesting dilemma for us. So what are the features of academia that could be an issue? How many of you are familiar with Deborah Tannen's work? She did some phenomenal work. She's a linguist who did some phenomenal work and she published New York Times bestsellers grounded in really serious, solid, important research. She did a lot of stuff on gender, but she has a book out called The Argument Culture in the United States, and she focuses on different contexts, and one of them is on the academic environment. So she talks about the culture of critique, where we do things like privileged debate, you get points for finding fault, we play the doubting game, which is, I just need to dig enough to create doubt about your perspective, to create doubt about your data, to create doubt about your argument. So that's important, and we reinforce the doubting game. I mean, we evaluate, for tenure, we evaluate journal articles, we evaluate performances, and one of the things we're looking at is where can we find fault? We've often done things like where criticism is equated with critical inquiry, which it may not be the same thing. And our rhetoricians actually can speak to us in a much better way about this than I can. The cut and thrust of academic discourse. We have a value on it. That's an interesting statement because I think it can be used functionally by an actor to say, it's normative what I'm doing, it's just the normal cut and thrust. She argues it's actually an easier strategy because you don't have to think integratively, right? And you can feel smarter. She says you'll feel smarter by that. What are the risks, though, of that kind of culture? One is polarization or oversimplification. And we see this, you've seen this sort of rhetoric discussion at a political level in the country. We ignore nuances and subtleties. We don't go after the complexities. We obscure that, obviously. And unfortunately, if it's not managed effectively, we move to demonization, which is that whole thing about not only do your ideas suck, but so do you. That's on tape. Sorry about that one.
Is that based on theoretical language?
I'm sorry for being so technical, everybody. I'll try. Other features of academic freedom. The what and how. We are supposed to